Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. And we are just about to get started. I think we have a few people already on the call. I haven't done one of these in a while, so it's really good to be back and having a bit of a conversation with many of you. So let me pull up my slides before we get started. So for those of you who have not used this platform before, there's basically a little mechanism on the bottom that you are prompted with ask a question. So you can actually use that to ask me questions throughout the presentation. And then at the end, I want to make sure that I have enough time to answer those questions, right? So if you see something that's intriguing, if you are really curious to know more about a specific aspect of what I'm going to talk to you today, just use that little ask the question prompt at the bottom. You can just do that. You can even vote on other people's questions as well. So at the very end, I want to make sure we have at least maybe 15 minutes or so to answer questions from all of you. So we're going to be able to use that tool, which is good. Well, hopefully you can see my screen. This is great to be here with all of you today and really share publicly some of the work that I've been doing, really my first sort of large project that I've been doing at Interos, a company that I joined just over 6 months. And we're going to get into those details quite soon. So welcome everyone. And then hopefully you enjoy, the set of slides that I have here and then more questions towards the end. Right. So this is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit. How we build a groundbreaking data visualization in 6 weeks. So just a little bit about myself before. So for those who don't know me, I've been kind of really doing design, product design, UX design for a while now, 15 plus years, in large companies like Microsoft and Google, companies that no longer really exist as such, like Nokia, but also small places like Code Academy and others. I've really done everything, from, large platforms, mobile, websites, campaigns, gaming, you name it. I think I've done it really, all of it by now. So it's really been a fun journey for me to be involved in. You might also recognize me as an author and a speaker in the data visualization community. In fact, I wrote 3 books over the past, 12 years or so. I think Visual Complexity just turned 10 last year. So I've been doing this for a while, being part of that community and really researching and writing a lot about some of the interesting aspects about data visualization and its growth over the centuries. I've also been a speaker, right? I was mentioning not just a writer, but I really spoke at events. I think right now it has probably surpassed 1,000 events around the world. So, I spoke in many places, large and small, from TED, of course, Harvard, MIT, Ars Electronica. It's been super fun. And always the journey is really what gets me excited, getting to know more people and interesting cultures. That's really what one of the things that certainly drives me. And of course, all the stages that I've been at, I think perhaps the most nerve-wracking of all has been the TED main stage. Certainly an experience that no one really forgets. So if you're curious, if you haven't seen my TED Talk, you can definitely see it online, a visual history of human knowledge. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that I've now been doing at Interos. And Interos is a fascinating place. We are growing so much, so fast. And I joined the company after 5 years at Google. And I joined it roughly, I would say, June, July last year. And for those who don't know Interos, we are really changing the game when it comes to understanding supply chains, right? One of the mission is using artificial intelligence to create a living map of your business ecosystem, right? Mapping every relationship, every risk, monitoring, modeling, mapping. Those are really important things for us as a company. And we are one of the few female CEO-led unicorns, which is also something that I feel, very proud of. So if you were to log into the product, this is what you would see, right? So we provide, and this is really important for context on what you are about to see, some of the things that I want to show you today, which is really about the I score, right? And the I score is really this proprietary formula that we created to evaluate the health of your ecosystem, right? And we have different tiers, right? There's, of course, tier 1, which is your direct suppliers. There's tier 2, right? Your suppliers. There's a tier 3, and there's many more tiers, right? So it's a really complex system once you start getting into the nitty-gritty details of a supply chain. And for the most part, people are really not aware so much of tiers 2, 3s, and so on, because they're not just very visible, right? You don't really know them by name, especially if you are, a really large company. So you saw before our Interos is really, we are really dedicated to mapping this, really interesting, complex supply chain. And when I joined around 6 months ago, this is what we had. Like, we had this really interesting mapping solution, visualizing the geographic distribution of your suppliers and your buyers right across the planet, where they were within different regions of the globe. But it was really not getting to what our mission stands for, which is like mapping every relationship. As we know, supply chain is a really dense, really complex network, right? So we wanted to answer that question of like, how can we actually understand all the meaningful relationships that occur within all these dots, within all these suppliers and buyers within my ecosystem, which is really vast, right? Some ecosystems have thousands and thousands of suppliers, as you see here. So how do those relationships actually operate, and what's in it for me, right? As the the sort of the epicenter of the supply chain. So we wanted to reach that. We wanted to answer that question, and we focused on 2 primary use cases for this kind of new visualization we are already embarking on. Use case number 1 is really about what are the high-risk companies in my tier 2 and 3, and how do they connect back to me, right? So tier 1 is your direct suppliers. In most cases, especially if you are a small business, you kind of know them by name, right? Who provides, a given, your given ingredients, or provides a given service. But it's the tier 2 and 3 that is a little bit more opaque for most people, right? So having visibility into that and understanding how those companies in those faraway tiers connect back to you, it's really, really empowering. And then use case number 2 is maybe you heard about some company in the news, let's say in an article in the New York Times about maybe a cyber attack that they just had, and you want to see where is that company in your ecosystem, and now they actually connect back to your organization, right? So that was really the premise on how we got started thinking about finding a visualization that can actually fulfill these 2 use cases. But this is not as easy as you might find. So let me just explain to you a little bit the challenge we have at hand, right? So first of all, we at Interos have a lot of data. I mean, we are really like a data-driven company, right? And this is, even though we are now at 350 million plus companies in our database, it's constantly growing. Every week, we are ingesting more data sources. We are scraping many different points of different data sources. We are growing our database every single day, right? So this is already a large number, and it gets scary to understand how it's growing so fast. So even if we were to focus on just a subset of this complex network, it can still be very large. This is just an example. We have many different customers, but let's say that customer A, which is a real customer, I'm just not providing any names for privacy concerns here. Customer A has roughly 26,000 companies in their tier 3. Tier 3 gets really, really crazy with some customers. So if we took 1 second to interact with each company of that customer in tier 3, it would take us more than 7 hours to overhaul all 26,000 companies. That's a lot of time. That's just impractical, right? From a user experience standpoint. So, and customer A, it's far from being an edge case, right? We have other customers like B and C that have much larger ecosystems. I mean, when you get to like tier 3, let's say for customer C, you got 100 plus thousand companies. It's really, really vast, right? So how can we humans interact with such a vast number of entities in a meaningful way that really empowers us with knowledge? I mean, there's of course a few things we could do, right? I mean, there are meaningful groups, clusters, and aggregates that become really critical as a means of identifying patterns and consuming this data, right? One, of course, that comes to mind, and we use it a lot within our platform, is regions and countries, right? That makes a lot of sense, right? Identifying those and grouping based on geography, right? That's a really implicit sort of way of grouping things. Another implicit way of grouping is based on industries and sub-industries, right? Maybe you want to identify patterns through that type of aggregate. But of course, regions and industries are not the only meaningful clusters for when it comes to supply chain, right? We can be really creative in defining categories or simply letting users define their own category. And we actually do that a lot. We have this feature that anyone can create a custom group of entities based on whatever criteria they have, right? This could be low performing companies, could be, close to me, that whatever is the criteria that you have, it's a custom way of grouping companies. And it's also easier that way, because if you want to monitor them on a regular basis, it's a custom group that you have defined yourself. We can, of course, also rely on the power of search to filter through the noise, right, and find a desired signal within any large ecosystem and supply chain. But everything I spoke about until now, in terms of complexity, I'm only talking about the nodes, right, the entities, the individual companies. When we consider the edges, right, the lines between them, the problem escalates tenfold. And it becomes extremely hard for both machines to process that level of complexity, and of course, for us humans to understand it. Yet, we don't have to show everything all the time, right? We can really be critical about what we show, we can prioritize, and give users control over what they want to see, right? That's a super critical thing for us to think about. And I always go back to this, what is called the information seeking mantra. Overview first, zoom and filter, then details on demand, right? That's a really powerful feature for us to think about. So let me walk you through some of the inspiration we had to kick off this project in the first place. Now that you understand a little bit of the complexity, right? What's at stake, how challenging this is to actually do with the data that we have at our disposal. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we did in order to get to the final visualization that it's now live on our product. So from the beginning, the circle construct was really a huge inspiration, right? And of course, circle is, as many of you know, a metaphor of unity, of movement, of globality, and connectivity, right? And, it's probably not an accident that, our logo is actually a circle, right? The Interros logo is actually a circle. We also have this beautiful globe visualization in our main website. When you go to interos.ai, this is the globe that you see depicting the idea of a global supply chain, of an interconnected global supply chain, right? So the circle metaphor becomes really part of our of our brand, right? Of our presence as a company. And of course, it also helps that I, in fact, know a thing or two about circles. In fact, I wrote a book about circles called The Book of Circles. How appropriate. And in this book, I really, for those who haven't seen it or are not aware of it, this is a book, was actually my latest, last book, published a few years back. And in this book, I really cover hundreds and hundreds of circular diagrams, charts, maps, and constructs depicting all the different ways humans have used the circle construct to visualize information and data. And what I found over the years is that these three are the oldest archetypes of the circle, right? Both of these three items can go back as far in time as 40,000 BC, right? And we can see any of those constructs in the early days of our species, right? In rock carvings from Africa, from Asia, really like fascinating sort of examples of our appeal for these three particular visual metaphors. One, of course, the concentric rings, which even today is still being used for hypnosis, right, as a means to create an hypnotic effect on humans. Of course, the spiral, and then you have the section circle, also known as the sun wheel, right? The wheel motif, which is so popular in modern day technology as well. So these are really kind of ingrained almost in our minds as humans because they have been with us for so long. Of course, I was also inspired by much more modern type of visualizations, that really captivate the power of the circle and this idea of entities as bubbles, as circles within a larger circle, as you can see here. But then, this also took me back to, another research that I did on visual complexity, a really old website that I put together back in 2005, and where I categorize different types of network visualizations. And one of them is this, which I think at the time I called this a radial segmented network. And it's basically different. It's almost like concentric rings, right? And they are all interconnected in different ways. So it was a really appealing category that I was discovering as I was doing research on network visualization years ago, right? And funny enough, here I am, like looking back at this really old projects and finding inspiration in them again. So now that you've seen some of the inspiration, let me show you some early sketches. As always, right? A lot of the projects we end up doing start like this, right? Just early ideas on layout, the user interface, some of the controls we could do, filters, but also start thinking a little bit about interaction modes, transitions, right? How could we go from one place to the other in a seamless way? So as soon as we had a few ideas on paper, it was time to actually put together a digital version of this. And this is really the first iteration of this new novel way of looking at a supply chain, right? So what you see here is a representation of your ecosystem, and each ring represents a tier. So tier 1 is very much close to the core, and then you have tier 2, tier 3, right? And then started to think a little bit about search, what role search could actually play here. We wanted to build a really flexible structure, a very flexible design system here, in the sense that it could actually grow to incorporate other tiers. Right now, we only have it up to tier 3, but in the future, we could actually include more tiers, right? 4, 5, and so on, which again, it raises the level of complexity and data to a whole different level, right? As you saw from my previous slides. And starting to hint a little bit about, hey, how could those connections be visualized in a way that is not disruptive to the user, that's still, somehow meaningful, right? So the idea of the shortest path came about, which is not showing all connections necessarily between all of these circles, because again, it would create this massive hairball or spaghetti incident, as I like to call them, but instead focusing on one, let's say, specific company that I'm clicking or searching for, and the shortest path and how it connects to me in the shortest path possible, right? So understanding those, and that really alleviates the pressure on, just from a graphical standpoint, on representing, this, tremendous number of lines on screen. Another thing we were kind of like playing in the beginning was, wouldn't it also be cool to see this kind of triangulation of companies? And this is something we're still debating whether or not it's interesting to show, right? with, not just how I'm connected to company A, but also how company B is connected to company A and myself, right? And you create this kind of like interesting love triangle of companies, and with a lot of insight from that connectivity. So these were really like our very first slides on what this visualization could feel. The code name we had aptly for this internally was Galaxy, because it kind of resembles this kind of solar system, a galaxy of sort, right, with orbiting planets. So that was really the first iteration. We showed this to leadership, our CEO, and she was excited about this. Many of us were as well. It sounds like a really interesting, visual metaphor when it comes to mapping a supply chain, and a very novel one as well, right? We are in the process of getting a patent for this as well. So we are really excited about some of the work that we have been doing in this space. So as soon as that was approved, it was time to really start thinking a little bit about how all the details could actually play together, right? And really work as a solid interactive experience. So the second iteration is very similar to what you saw before, but now you start seeing a few more things, right? There's a few more details on the information that you might see per tier. There are aspects of maybe filtering, right? We start thinking about what filters could we have, what kind of controls could we provide users so that this becomes kind of a playground of sorts for them. And what you see here is maybe the default, which is like you're looking at the largest companies in your ecosystem. But wouldn't it be cool, based on the I score that we have, right, on the risk score that we provide, to look at, maybe the safest companies in your ecosystem, right? But also the inverse, right? What are the riskiest? And perhaps that's, of course, the most important use case, right? What are the riskiest companies in your ecosystem? And now do they connect back to me, right? Going back to that initial use case that we debated. So this is, again, a visualization of those of risk in your supply chain by tier. Also, how we could actually play and interact with some of these dots to get more information. Ideas on how to use search. Again, here you can start seeing some details and ideas on more on interaction design, and how we could actually interact and play with some of these components. And then finally, if I search for a company, well, what do I see, right? Again, like that map of connectivity, how that plays out. And this is just, again, a few early stage iterations on what we could do. Still that idea of a triangulation of sorts, right? Not just myself and another company, as you see here, but also like connecting maybe company A and company B, and see how all of that plays a role. So as soon as we got here, it was like, wow, this is really meaningful, right? And again, specifically because we have filters, we can also filter not just, it's good for humans, of course, because you can actually just, through progressive disclosure, just see a given amount of information at a time. But also it's great for machines, right? It's really, really demanding when you have a lot of edges and have to like visualize so many edges and nodes on screen. So this is a way of limiting that level of complexity. So we were starting to feel really good about these ideas. And this is when we jumped straight into code, right? And I'm going to show you some of those. This is also when we started to think about a bit more, putting a little bit more rigor on the structure. Sort of the guidelines here, or the red lines, as you want to, whatever you want to call them, guidelines, red lines. Just putting a little bit more sort of, again, rigor on the whole skeleton of the visualization itself, understanding the limits, how they can operate. Because again, the next stage would be trying to code this, and it would help if we had specific limitations on how this could operate as a system, right? As a full-fledged experience. So these are ideas on, even we're still testing, like, what is the limit in terms of like even number of dots or companies we get to display per tier, right? Understanding that limitation, using a form of circle packing to visualize this. That was part of like our early stage investigations, right? Really creating, again, this skeleton for this visualization. And so after this, we just, as I was mentioning, we just jumped straight into code, right? This is some of the first iterations already running with live data from one of our customers. This was already a live ecosystem, and the layout was working. It was awesome. I remember the first time I saw this, working together with a data visualization engineer, with a couple of them, in fact, on the team, and this was just great to see. Not only that, but we left a lot of filters, as you can see on the right side, so that we could play with it ourselves internally, right? To see what is the right sort of layout, the sizing of the circles, the orientation, the coloring mechanism. All of these were spectrums that we could play, and it was really fun just to get a sense of like how this could work. At the time, the engineers, we were using both a mix of keylines. Keylines is a great tool to like visualize networks, and a mix of keylines and D3. We use D3 primarily for like the layout that gives this really awesome layout. But then, of course, there was a lot of custom code to make the two tools kind of work with each other. Also, a lot of like novel ways of looking at this layout, because this is not just a custom chart, right, that you can just get straight away from a given package. So there was a lot of work involved in getting this right, but a lot of these filters, a lot of these controls help us getting to where we wanted to go. And then once we had the layout figured out, working with real data and testing with different types of ecosystems and different customers, it was time to see how if these connections are actually working, and they were, right. So you can see here how the circle at the very on the core of the chart is now connected with various companies both in tier 1 and tier 2, and some patterns are really really complex, like this one, right. There's so many possibilities for you to get to like point B, right, and connect that company back to you, right. There's endless possibilities. So it's really interesting to see, and you're going to see, I'm going to just show you a quick demo of what that looks like. And sometimes you have really simple shortest path, but other times you have this type of scenario. So for us, again, on the design side, is how can we minimize some of the visual noise here, like the edges, like should they be fully white? Should we actually make them a little bit more semi-transparent, so that we start playing with some of these tweaks here and there in terms of the coloring, the layout, so that we have a solid experience at the end. And as soon as we had that running prototype using live data in code, we put this in front of customers, right? We want to get as soon as possible input and feedback from customers as early on as possible. So that means that as soon as sometimes we even have a sketch, we want to put that in front of customers. Then it becomes really a conversation with customers. They feel included. They feel part of the process from a very early stage. And we get to validate very early on, so we don't waste any time going down a path that it's not intended to go, right? So there's a lot of benefits for us to do very, very early user testing and user validation. And, in this particular case, we were testing two specific tasks based on the use cases that I showed you before. I don't want to go into all the details of the study, but we have an amazing, also growing user research team on the team, as part of my team reporting to me. And they did this awesome study, and it's basically gave us a lot of insights into the things that were working really well, right? People were loving the galaxy metaphor, the meaning of tiers. They were getting it, the whole thing straight away without much explanation, which is always a good sign. What circles were representing, et cetera, the whole idea of rings. But there were a few challenges when it came to search, when it came to understanding paths and filtering, right? Filtering was something that we had to work on a lot more. So that's, again, the benefit of also doing user research very early on in the stage, is that you get to actually get a lot of ideas to iterate and improve things. So this was really like our final iteration, and you're going to see how close it is to the live version you see on the product. there's a lot of things here to sort of deconstruct. The idea, of course, at the core is it's the same, right? It's like 3 rings, 1 tier each, right? The MAI ecosystem. But if you notice on the right panel, we changed things a lot, right? So there's filters, but we wanted to do filters in a really human way. What I mean by that is that instead of just a set of boxes that you could just control and have pull downs, we wanted to make this almost like a sentence that you would read, right? And it would read as such: show me X number of my riskiest suppliers sized by connections and divided in 3 tiers. And you could change any of those things, and the visualization on the core would just adjust, right? And then we wanted to go further. We want to have this like risk score control, this panel that allow you to select a specific range within the score, right? A specific range within risk. So really looking at the reddest, the riskiest, or the green, the safest, right? But having the control on the specific range you wanted to see. And at the same time, also giving users control on how many nodes, how many companies they want to see per tier, right? That turned out more gratuitous than useful. People thought it was really playful, but didn't really see a lot of value. Again, the great benefit of doing user research, we learn a lot from this kind of conversations with customers. And then, of course, ability to search and ability to see a table, a list, right, of all the dots you see on screen. And today, even on the product, you can actually download that list as a CSV file. This is just looking at, again, the opposite, looking at the safest companies in your ecosystem, right? You're looking at all the green ones, which could be still useful, right? I think by far the riskiest is the most important use case, but sometimes you want to see what's actually working, what's actually doing really well, and the companies that are really doing well across the board within your supply chain. These are just other iterations on the filtering mechanisms we had, right? As you can see here, different ways of controlling, the kind of, are you looking at the riskiest, the safest, the most connected? Also allowing, this is still, by the way, also live in our products, controlling the overall number of dots you actually get to see on the screen. And this might actually seem a small thing, but this was a super powerful tool for us to control complexity, right? Because if we are imposing a limit, again, it's good for humans because it's a little bit of a paradox of choice, and you get really anxious when you're looking at too many things. Where do I even start? So it's good for humans to put a threshold on how many things you actually get to see on the screen. But it's also great for machines, right? Again, it's great for performance. Things can be a lot more performant because we're not really asking the system to pull, thousands and thousands of nodes and edges at the same time. So we did a lot of the work here, right, on this. Also thinking about what happens when I hover a given circle, like what is the right information to surface, right? What is the right information when I actually get to search, right? What shows up if I search for a specific company? What is that experience like, right? So this is the ability to search for a company. And then finally, after I search for something, what is that that's sort of mid-level of information that I get? So here you get to see this company, the shortest path how it connects to you, but also get to read a lot more information. This is pulling from our platform as well, from other areas of our platform, getting to know more about the specific company, right? Not just the I score, but more information. There's a summary, there's a website, just a lot more relevant firmographics on this specific supplier. Now, when you build something like this, you have to think about a continuous journey, right? You have to think of that, this is not just build it and they will come or build it and never look at it again. It's not like that at all. Everyone that is involved in product knows that that's not ever the case, right? So it's really important that we put together a plan for different iterations, right? So this is something we did on just a simple mirror board, right? And we basically work on cycles, right? Or sprints, if you want to call it. In other places call it sprints. But we do like every 3 weeks, we have a cycle with engineering where we tackle a bunch of things, right? And so our role here was, of course, target a set of features for the MVP, right? Which was launched last year. But then how can we get to that sort of blue sky scenario optimal version where a lot of the filters are really where we wanted it to be, the coloring mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about deconstructing that final vision that we have into digestible bits and then grouping those bits per cycle, right? So in cycle one, what are some of the features we want to get to, right? For example, we didn't have search, when we actually started. We didn't have the ability to do like a table view, right? So those things came after the MVP, right? But the MVP at the same time, it has to work, right? Just because you are lacking certain features, the whole experience needs to feel solid, right? It has to be a comprehensive experience still as an MVP. But of course, there's always enhancements, there's always improvements that you can do over time. So something like that provides almost like a roadmap. This was really like a visual roadmap of where we want to do and what we want to build cycle after cycle, right? And that turned out to be, very productive because we knew exactly what we had to do and when. Even simple things like this, this was something that we put together as a matrix for the filtering capability that we have, right? In MVP, we had a good amount of filtering capability, but like other more advanced types of filters that were dependent on APIs and things of that nature, those only came afterward, right? In phase one and phase two, primarily, right? We had to, again, progressively add those mechanisms to be in place so that it could create this more, again, holistic and fulfilling experience. So let me show you what we have today. So this is actually a live screenshot of what you actually find today on the product. And I am always fascinated when actually the live, final version, the coded final version is actually better than what you had envisioned in the design comp. And I think that this one is very much like that. So I think that's when you have a really good collaboration with engineering, but also things are really working, and everyone is really passionate about really proud about craftsmanship, attention to detail, um, product sort of excellence, and I think that helps a lot, right, in building the right thing together when everyone is on the same page when it comes to that level of quality and expectation. So let me show you the demo. I'm just gonna stop sharing and open another window here. So just give me 1 second. All right, so this is, let me just share here. 1 second, I'm gonna share my screen. All right, hopefully you can see my screen now. So this is our live product, right? We are in our product that for the most case, it's only customers can see it. And this is our Galaxy, right? So this is our supplier buyer visualization, but code name is Galaxy that we only use internally. So we added a few things, in the past. Again, this ability to like select overall number of companies. So you can select less companies, you can select more companies. If you really want to get to the nitty gritty of things, maybe I just want to look at the 200 companies, right? So now I can see some companies in my ecosystem. I can see, how many buyers they have, how many suppliers. Then I can actually click on any of them. And now, bam, I can see how this specific company, commercial aircraft, is connected to me through to Boeing, right? And I can start understanding my whole ecosystem in such a way, right? I can see how Lineage Power China connects back to me through another company, through L3 areas, right? So you start uncovering all this like hidden mechanisms, right? And again, as I was mentioning to you, some of these connectivity maps are a little bit more clean, or I would say simple, than others. Some are just a little bit more complex. I don't know if I can pick one that's a little bit more challenging from just a visualization standpoint. There are a few ones that are a little bit more dense. So this is a good example of a really dense one, right? So China Mobile Communications is on my tier 3, but it connects multiple companies in my ecosystem, right? It connects to several on my tier 2, like BlackBerry Limited, to China Mobile, to Baidu, and which also connect to several on my tier 1, which actually almost my entire tier 1 system, as I'm looking at it, right? And then here you can actually see, of course, the I score. You can see the breakdown of different risk factors that we have in our platform. This is part of our platform that you can do this for any company in our ecosystem. We are, again, 350 plus million companies and counting. So this is extremely powerful. And let me go back to where we were. Let me pull in 800 again. You can see this loading, which is awesome. All these really, really cool companies. So a lot of circle packing going on here. And then what I want to do is I want to look more specifically at my really high risk. So now I'm looking at a nice score of 0 to roughly 30. So these are really low when it comes to score. These are scoring really, really poorly in my ecosystem, right? So this is the National Iranian Oil Company. This is, some other company here, the Cavian Petrochemical Company. And, if you were to open that, you can see they are really very vulnerable when it comes to restrictions, cybersecurity, ESG, environmental and social governance. They are doing really poorly. So it allows you to see some of the bad apples in your ecosystem, right? And see how they connect back to you. But again, you could do the same for the really healthy companies, right? Now I'm looking at my healthiest companies in my ecosystem, right? The ones that go from roughly 80 to 100. So those are really, really healthy companies. And it's great. It's great to see that, right? So Lenovo, for example, they are a pretty high score, right? They are doing really well across all these factors. They are, of course, part of my tier 1, but let me pick up another one from here. So Styles Machinery, based in Michigan, is also doing pretty well. Geopolitical a little bit lower. So we have a whole methodology team that calculates a lot of these really complex formulas to create that final score. It's 40 plus different factors and metrics that goes into all of these. And then finally, you can actually again also look at the score based on one of these factors that I was just showing you, right? I can also search for any company. So if I search for, I don't know if there's a company called Manuel, but there's one company called Mandali. That's cool. So here I am. Mandali sits on my tier 2 and connects to me through Boeing. See, you learned something today based on Italy. And again, you go back to this ecosystem. I like to say, it's a very self-centered ecosystem because you are the sun. You are at the core of the system, which is really cool. Another thing we can do is you can invoke a table and you get to see a list of all the companies that you're looking at any given point, and you can just download the CSV. So our customers love this feature. Then they get to download the data and actually play with it themselves. So that was a little bit of the demo. Of course, there's a lot more things we could do here. There's a lot of filters we already have in other areas of the product, from countries to industries that you could use. But this is our very new alternative way of looking at a supply chain. This is, the groundbreaking data visualization experience I wanted to showcase to you today. And we built this, by the way, I want to highlight this. We built this in 6 weeks. We went from that first design comp that you saw right in the early stages after the sketches to the first product, to the first live version in the product in roughly 6 weeks. So it's a really fast iterative process that you can achieve, of course, in a place like Interros, where we take, innovation and speed, very seriously. So let me just stop sharing, and hopefully there's questions from some of you. If you haven't already, right, Brady, I don't know if Brady has heard about the spaghetti incidents for the first time. Yeah, people call it the hairball, I think, in the community, but I like the spaghetti incident a little bit better. All right, so if you haven't used that little ask a question module below, please do so. You can also vote, upvote or downvote on other people's questions. All right, so I'm gonna tackle some of those questions that you might have. Right, as a personal galaxy for a client, do you think placing me at the center is appropriate, or as a next fund, maybe another supplier should be put in the center with their connection to me? That's a great question. I like that. Yes. Yes, the Earth is not always at the center, right? So yeah, taking that approach. Yeah, it seems like it was a good starting point for us. And it was just something that customers just grasped it immediately, right? The fact that they are at the core, tier one is their direct suppliers. So it's just a more natural way of thinking about your ecosystem, your supply chain. Having said that, in fact, one of the future features we want to do is having a little edit on the inner dot, and you can click on that, and then basically you can select either you or any other company to be at the core, right? Maybe by default it's you, but you can just click on that, search for any company, and now that company is at the core of that chart, at the core of this visualization. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be really powerful in the future. So thanks for that question, Eitan. So the second question is, with so many filters and options, have you considered modeling machine learning to help present users the most insightful views? That's a great question. I think we are learning a lot. I mean, not so much from, of course, we are actually applying machine learning into other areas, when it comes to like modeling, understanding risk across the globe and what factors, affected, like weather patterns and many things of that nature. But not so much into the insightful views. Apologies for that. I think we are really learning from people, from customers directly by conversation. It's not just the early testing we did, right, on some of the stuff that you saw. We show this stuff all the time to existing and even potential customers. So we got a lot of input, a lot of feedback on what's working, what's not working, what are some of the most insightful views, what are things that are a little bit more superfluous. And again, we keep iterating this. It kind of, we are, I mean, for those of you who are in product know this, but like that's actually one of the things that I love about building products is that it's never really fine. I mean, I would say digital products, because physical products are a bit of a different beast. And you kind of know this when you do a book, in the sense that it's done and it's really done. You cannot really change anything about it. So I learned that really the hard way. But digital products are fascinating because it's a continuous iteration, right? It's like continuous tweaks and improvements. So it's never completely done. I wouldn't say, the visualization is by any means done. I think it's going to be tweaked and improved over time. It kind of reminds me about this approach. I think Jackson Pollock had this really fascinating approach to painting, different from any other artists, which was he painted something, right? Of course, the whole action painting, the process that he used, but then it was never really done. He would just leave that painting sitting for like sometimes days, weeks, and months, and then he would go back to it, and then he would just like, add a few more things here and there, and then he would leave it again on the side, right? And then he would go back again. So I think there's something really kind of poetic and powerful about this sort of like detachment, right? Take a little bit of a breathing from this. And when you come back to it, you see it from a different eyes. You have learned more from customers, from talking to users, and you can improve and tweak things in a better way. So thanks for that question, Douglas. So now the other question that we have is, with so many companies in your database, how does your team go about updating the companies so that their I-score of suppliers is current and correct? Yes, it's take a lot. I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge for us. It's not really so much about, even though of course visualizing the data is challenging, but like the data management aspect of it is really, really challenging, right? And avoiding gaps in the data as well, right? There's certain metrics, certain information and data, certain, let's say, firmographics. Okay, so let's say information on given companies. Sometimes we have for all companies. Sometimes we have a few gaps here and there, right? So making sure that we have this, really solid coverage for data. I think it's one of the most, challenging aspects of what we do. even more so than visualizing it itself, right? Because without that data being, properly set up, well covered across the board, across geography, across industry, it's hard to even like do a proper visualization in the first place. So that's something that we always working on. Our teams are really growing in that space so that we can continue to do a great job there as well. So thanks for that question, Our routine. That's a cool name. All right. So we have another question, I guess, from an anonymous user. Oh no, Nelson. Nelson Silva asks, Manuel, tier 3 seems to be too short to capture the hidden unknown small tier N suppliers. What was the role of NLPAI here? Can you please comment? That was tough. We had to make some formulas between tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1 in order for it to actually work. I don't have the full details. I remember we had like a few discussions on that, so that we are actually pulling the right number of circles per tier, right? So when I say we are showing 800 of the riskiest suppliers, right? Inherently, there's a breakdown per tier. So we created a formula of what that breakdown would be, right? And it's prioritized according to a few different metrics. Things like connectivity, things like connectivity in our database, right? So there's a few criteria there. I don't recall the exact details of the formula that we created, Nelson, but it was quite the challenge. I think when he goes to tier 3, it's so challenging. I mean, it's really so many companies, right? It's just overwhelming from both a machine and a human perspective. So coming up with means of ways of mitigating that complexities is pivotal. Okay, so we have Sender who asks, "Hi Manuel, thanks a lot for sharing this. Super inspiring. Well, appreciate it. I'm curious if you can speak a bit more about your exploration phase. Seems like you converged quite quickly in the beginning, even without user feedback. How did you know you were on the right track?" That's a great point. I mean, so we had, even though I said we did like a proper user testing, right? When we actually had something coded, just because it was easier to ask customers to do a specific task, right? And then actually see them do, whatever the filtering was, or the overing or the search. So we had to build a little bit of a prototype for them to do, that specific set of tasks, right? So that always takes time. But even before we got to that stage, we already were showing static comps to customers, and we were already getting feedback from that. Again, I think why maybe you question, maybe why the solar system metaphor? For two reasons. Of course, it's a very implicit thing when it comes to tiers, right? When you think about tiers, you tend to imagine this idea of one, and then it gets further from the periphery, right? So tier 1. So the whole idea of concentric rings was really powerful. But of course, it also helps that I've done a lot of research on circles, right? And concentric rings are one of the most evocative, circle constructs that you can do. And again, it's been with us for so many thousands of years. So it was like, kind of like the best of both worlds. But again, it's important to emphasize that even though we did a proper testing, later on, we were showcasing this stuff to use and collecting feedback very early in the process when we had just like a few design comps here and there. And that's always something that you want to be better at, like showing as early as possible, so that you don't want to, again, waste time going down a path that it's not the right one. Oh, I have another question from Brady who asks, did you consider using a more open-ended filtering system, for example, allowing users to string together filter sets with or I have not, Brady. That's a great comment and a great idea. I have not. Again, I think that's definitely something we can explore, we can consider for the future. And that gives me a lot of food for thought, to be honest. So I appreciate that. We're going to be thinking about, again, this visualization. It's still very in its infancy, right? It was really like live, I think, in November. So it's still very novel. We've been iterating it ever since, but I think there's definitely areas, and filtering is always one of them, because giving our complexity, our large complex data set, filtering is the way to go. And so finding the best, simplest way of filtering our complexity is going to be super important. So thanks for the suggestion. I really appreciate it. All right, Ike asks, amazing work. Thank you, Ike. Appreciate it. Could you share more about the composition of your team? Oh, I lost that. The composition of your team. Oh, what is that? Oh, could you share more about the composition of your team? You mentioned research. Who else is in your team? Data engineers, UI. Yes. By the way, we are hiring. So if any of you are interested in joining this team, so I lead all design, user research, and data visualization at Interos. We have, of course, design and research. Those are the two sort of strongest skills on the team where we have more people. But we just hired our first UX writer. Very exciting about that. So how we treat actually things that are written on the product makes a huge sense for us. We just hired our first UX engineer, UX/data visualization engineer, and I think we're going to need much more in the future. I think we're going to need 2 or 3 very soon. What else? We just hired our UX program manager. We are in the process of hiring a user research manager. So we want to definitely grow and solidify that capability in the team. So those are some of the roles we are growing, but definitely UX/data visualization engineering will be a super important aspect on the team. So if any one of you is interested, just let me know. I think there's another question here from UK. Fascinating data viz. Thank you, UK. Appreciate it. Just wonder, have your team thought of having more data viz to support those results, like tree shape viz, bar charts, zone charts? Yes. Again, the one that you saw is just the beginning. We have 2 to 3 more planned data visualization experiences to be launched in the product this year. The thing is, supply chain, as you probably have seen in the news, it's such a complex system. It's almost as complex, if not sometimes, to ecosystems, natural ecosystem, right? In the sense that there's so many factors, there's so many companies around the world, the interconnections affected by, you saw a little, not a little, but a large container ship gets stuck somewhere in the globe, and it affects something completely else in the other part of the globe, right? So that element, that global element of interconnectivity is fascinating. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why I'm here, because I love really these complex challenges, but I really think data visualization is going to play a critical role in us understanding these hidden patterns within this vast supply chain, right? So, but it's not just a single visualization. We're going to have to create multiple visualizations of similar phenomenon. And if you have attended my previous webinars or talks, I like to give the example. I like to call this like your Mount Fuji, because your Mount Fuji, right? There's this the Great Wave of Kanagawa, right? This beautiful painting, Japanese painting, that depicts Mount Fuji, and it's actually part of a series of paintings, the 36 views of Mount Fuji, because you can see Mount Fuji from the plains, from the cities, from the sea. You almost need like these 360 different camera and angles to view every single viewpoint of the supply chain. And some of visualizations will not stick at all. They will be like just failed attempts, and that's fine. Failure is good. That's how you learn. That's how you evolve. But we're now in the process where we have to innovate. We have to create all these different viewpoints of the same system to see what are the ones that are more meaningful for our customers. So there's going to be a lot more innovation this year alone for our team. Cool. Well, I think we are out of time. I think someone asked here about the recording. Yes, there will be actually a recording of this webinar, and you can actually find it afterwards in the same link that you used to join the presentation. If you want to be notified of other webinars like this that I'm going to be doing in the future, you can just use the follow. I think there's a little call to action on the top of your screen saying follow. If you haven't done that, you can just follow me here on Crowdcast, and then you'll be notified as soon as there's a new webinar coming, so you can join them. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and it was a pleasure. And again, if you're interested, we are hiring. So just reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, any other means. I'm all ears. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.